a man was convicted almost 4 decades after he ended the lives of 2 women in California. Then, he interrupted his own sentencing hearing by singing in front of his victims' families. In 1986, 18-year-old Michelle Xavier and 20-year-old Jennifer Duey's naked and lifeless bodies were dumped in a remote area of Fremont, California. Michelle and Jennifer attended a birthday party dinner together on February 2nd. Hours later, the young women were found deceased by a motorcyclist along Mill Creek Road. They had been shot and stabbed. Despite numerous tips following the crime and thousands of leads, the case went cold. The case went cold for more than 3 decades until a detective found that it was David Mish's DNA under Jennifer's fingernails. At the time of the crime, Mish was an illegal substance addict who lived in the Fremont area and was known to burglarize businesses. Mish's father, Robert, was an alcoholic who was aggressive towards his wife and son. As a result of the constant physical assaults, he lost all interest in the educational process and spent most of his time on the streets. He was convicted in 1990 for taking the life of 36-year-old Margaret Narcissa Ball and sentenced to life imprisonment. Mish is also linked to the disappearance of Michaela Joy Gerecht, a 9-year-old girl who was kidnapped from a Hayward parking lot on November 19, 1988. Michaela was with her friends at Rainbow Market when a man moved her scooter closer to his car. When she tried to get the scooter back, he grabbed her and drove away with her in his car. She was never seen alive again. In 2020, Mish was charged with ending the life of Michaela. The Alameda County District Attorney's Office wrote, Mr. Mish claimed that he had seen the 2 young women being kidnapped at gunpoint and tried to save them. He used this as an explanation for the presence of his DNA in this case. Mish's DNA and lies were presented as evidence at his trial. Another piece of evidence stemmed from one of the victims' hands, which had a partial license plate number written on it. The plate matched a vehicle associated with Mish. On December 19, 2024, a jury found Mish guilty on 2 counts of first-degree slaying. On January 21, 2025, during his sentencing hearing, family members were reading their victim impact statements when Mish disrupted the proceeding by singing inside the courtroom. The sheriff's deputies then removed him from the courtroom. The prosecutors said that Mish displayed disrespectful behavior purposefully so that he would be thrown out. Chief Assistant District Attorney Royal Roberts said, David Mish's behavior in court was not only reprehensible, but a blatant display of no remorse for taking the lives of Jennifer Duey and Michelle Xavier. The families of these 2 young women have been waiting nearly 40 years to receive justice for their tragic and senseless slayings. Roberts said, thanks to the jury and this conviction, Mr. Mish will be held accountable. I want to recognize the prosecution team for their professionalism and hard work on this very complex case, starting with Deputy District Attorney Allison Donovan. 63-year-old David Mish will begin serving 2 25 years to life sentences consecutively in state prison after he completes the 18 years to life sentence he is currently serving. After nearly 40 years, the loved ones of a slain Colorado man finally got the justice they have been seeking. On November 21, 1985, 51-year-old Roger Dean became the victim in a slaying that was so horrific, it was like a scene from a movie. A man in a ski mask broke into Roger's Lone Tree home in Littleton, Colorado, and forced him to tie up his wife, Doris Jean DJ Dean, and tape her mouth shut. He then demanded the $30,000 in their savings account, but Roger tried to flee the house, and then the intruder shot and ended the life of Roger. A backpack and an orange ski mask that Roger tore off from the perpetrator's head was left behind when the suspect left the scene. According to witnesses, the perpetrator ran down the street of their neighborhood and got into a car. Those witnesses said sped away. From the beginning, several aspects of the case puzzled the investigators. Roger had twine marks on only one wrist, so it appeared that he had never actually been tied up by the gunman. Also, Roger was wearing contact lenses when he was shot. Yet, strangely, in an upstairs bedroom, his glasses were found covered with duct tape. Sergeant Anthony Spurlock of the Douglas County Sheriff's Department believed that both the twine and glasses were red herrings, planted to give the impression that Roger had been blindfolded and bound. He said, "We believe that Roger hired an individual to come over to basically kidnap him, take him to his bank, withdraw $30,000 from their account, and then obviously drop Roger off someplace so Roger could report a robbery and he would have that $30,000 to himself." During the investigation, the police also learned that Roger had taken nearly $30,000 from his business and put it in a secret account. According to DJ, her husband was not capable of what the police had accused him of. She said, "In my heart, I cannot believe that Roger had anything to do with this. This is the man I was married to for 26 years. And yes, there had been personal problems in the last years, especially since the demise of our son, but I knew the man too well." DNA samples were taken from the hair on the ski mask that was left behind, but due to a lack of advanced DNA technology, the case went cold. 5 years later, on July 21st, 1990, DJ and their daughter Tamara received an anonymous letter. Its author claimed to be the man who took the life of Roger. The letter demanded $150,000 that he said was owed to him. If the money was not delivered, he threatened to slay again. The letter read, in part, "Do you know that I have met your daughter Tammy on a few occasions? Do not make me end her. Your son is deceased. Your husband is deceased. Do not risk your daughter. She is the last one left." The authorities were convinced that the letter was legitimate and that it was written by Roger's perpetrator. He wrote that he would call her 6 days later on July 27th. DJ and Tammy were given round-the-clock protection. FBI agents moved into the house and set up a wiretap. When the man called as promised, he told DJ that Roger owed him money and that he wanted to be paid back. DJ agreed to pay him the $150,000. The FBI traced the call to a phone booth in Denver, but by the time they got there, the caller was gone. Roger's perpetrator called 12 more times, and then he told DJ to drive to a supermarket 20 miles north of her home and wait for further instructions. DJ tried to trap the caller with the help of an FBI agent hidden in her car. Surveillance trucks and a SWAT team were nearby. The man finally called and told DJ to leave the $150,000 in an alley behind an apartment complex in downtown Denver. Later that evening, on August 19, 1990, the FBI watched as DJ made the drop. They waited until dawn, but no one showed up. Special Agent Bob Pence of the Denver FBI said, whether or not he spotted something, whether or not he just took for granted that the law enforcement was involved, or whether or not he got cold feet. And although he did not detect any type of law enforcement, he just was too scared to actually make the pickup. I think all of those are possibilities. In his last call, the extortionist told Tammy that he planned to end her life. He said he would strike when she least expected it. The authorities only knew that the suspect is white, about 6 feet tall, and uses an extensive vocabulary. Even though there was an account of a 9-year-old girl, Carly Gibson, that said it was a black man. The statute of limitations has been exceeded in this case, the affidavit says, and investigators were never able to determine who wrote the extortion letters or made the calls, and the case went cold. 13 years later, in 2003, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation was finally able to develop a profile and enter it into a national database. There were no hits. Another 15 years later, in 2018, the investigators had another lab develop a different analysis. And in 2020, an investigator who was well-versed in DNA genealogy was able to determine the people who were likely the suspect's parents. That family had 2 sons. All of the years of waiting for the crime to be solved eventually became insufferable for DJ. She took her own life in 2020, 7 months before genetic genealogical evidence would link the perpetrator to the crime scene. It took decades of advancements in DNA technology for the detectives to link the suspect with items left at the scene, the backpack and the ski mask. Law enforcement began to monitor the 2 brothers. One of them, Michael Shannell Jefferson, boarded the Spirit Airlines flight between Los Angeles and New Orleans, and 2 deputies joined him. The affidavit says, "During the flight, detectives saw Michael drinking from a plastic water bottle. During the flight, Michael discarded the water bottle by handing it to a female flight attendant to be placed in the trash. Detectives intercepted the disposal and collected the water bottle without Michael knowing. Testing then determined that the DNA found on the water bottle was consistent with the profile of the samples collected from the ski mask in 1985. An investigator who boarded the cross-country flight with Jefferson also listened to the recorded phone calls sent by the believed sender of the letters in 1990 and said that he believed the voices sounded the same. The perpetrator, Michael Jefferson, was arrested on March 23, 2021 and extradited from Los Angeles to Colorado. On August 6, 2024, the 67-year-old pleaded guilty in a plea bargain. On January 16, 2025, a judge sentenced him to 32 years in prison for ending the life of Roger, with credit for more than 3 years of time already served. It was the maximum sentence, but Douglas County's district attorney believes he could be paroled in as little as 8 years. The victim's daughter said that her father's perpetrator has never taken accountability. Tamara Dean Harney said the following, referring to all of Jefferson's court hearings of the past few years. "I have been sitting behind him for 4 years. His expression is exactly what it was the entire time. He seems emotionless. He does not take any accountability. He does not seem like he cares." Tamara also said, "He could have done a lot for me, and a lot for himself, if he would have just talked about why he did what he did and offered an apology at least, or a recognition at all would be helpful. I have no respect for the person at all," Tamara said, given trial delays and the debacle with the recent DNA scandal in the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. "I think it is a good thing Mom was not here to witness this. If she was not already deceased, this process would have ended her. The DNA test that would link Jefferson to the crime is also the reason he pleaded guilty to a lesser offense, conspiracy to commit slaying, than he was originally charged with." Former forensic scientist Yvonne Missy Woods worked on this case, and after she was found to have manipulated DNA in other cases, the prosecutors felt that it was too big of a risk to go to trial, even though Jefferson's DNA result was also confirmed by an independent lab. A possible motive is that Jefferson was in a relationship with a woman that was an employee of Roger, so he could have thought that Roger was wealthy, and he therefore wanted money from him. Tamara said the following in court, "I never gave up hope that today would eventually come. Trying to put into words the impact that Michael Jefferson has had on me is challenging at best. He not only ended my dad's existence, but over the years, he purposefully attempted to make me question my safety and security, as well as the inherent goodness of people." A former Florida sheriff's deputy has been identified as the suspect in a crime that took place 45 years ago. At around 2 a.m. on November 5, 1979, Sheriff's Deputy John Greer radioed dispatch to say he discovered a sling at the farm store in Ridge Harbor, Florida. The victim, 25-year-old Adele Marie Easterly, an assistant manager at the store, had been shot once in the back and once in the head with a 12-gauge shotgun. The perpetrator, the sheriff's deputy said, escaped with approximately $7.34 from the store. Some deputies were suspicious about John Greer, but they did not have substantial evidence to connect him to Adele's case. A few months earlier, on August 27, 1979, Greer had called the sheriff's office to report that his wife, Jackie Greer, had shot herself in their home in Port Charlotte. He told the responding deputies that he was awakened by a pop and saw smoke coming from a closet in the home. Inside, he found his wife's body. The investigators had suspicions about the incident, but they were not able to link their concerns with evidence. Greer remained free. Roughly a year later, on October 3, 1980, Greer resigned from the sheriff's office 4 days after a female friend of his was found deceased. She was found sitting in her Ford Mustang in a wooded area of Port Charlotte, Florida, 9 days after she was reported missing by her husband. The sheriff's office suspected that she overdosed on pills because empty pill bottles were found in the car and a note was left behind. Her husband, however, told the sheriff's office that Greer used to follow her around and attempted to have relations with her. The sheriff's office followed up on numerous leads in Adele's case, including a friend who said Adele was having an affair with a married Charlotte County sheriff's deputy. The friend recalled Adele describing the deputy's account of his wife's demise as an accidental shooting that occurred after an argument. Eventually, the case went cold. Greer went to work at other police and sheriff's offices, usually near the west coast of Florida. He was also a pilot and held various aircraft positions. 36 years later, in 2016, the Cold Case Unit released a news statement detailing their suspicions in the case, without giving a name. They said that it was to let potential witnesses know a law enforcement officer was potentially involved. Their hope was that someone would come forward with information, and finally, there was a breakthrough in the case. A former sheriff's office explorer came forward and told the investigators that Greer had assaulted her and spoken about ending the life of Adele. She was also working the night that Adele lost her life and said that she saw Greer had blood on his bare hand. The detectives found the woman's allegations credible, but the statute of limitations for potential crimes linked to the alleged assault appeared to have run out. So instead, they focused on the cases of Adele Easterly and Jackie Greer. The Cold Case Unit developed probable cause to arrest Greer, and in April 2023, the investigators traveled to Tennessee, where he was living in an extended care facility in Kingsport. In his interview with the investigators, even though he was bedridden and could not carry on long conversations, Greer admitted to shooting both Adele and his wife. The deputies also investigated another suspicious fatality and some reported assaults connected to Greer, but were not able to gather conclusive evidence on those cases. Sheriff Bill Prummel said the following in a statement about the case. "I want to be clear that this individual does not represent the overwhelmingly great men and women who have worked for this agency over our century plus of existence." It was determined that Greer would never be well enough to stand trial. He passed away at the care center in Tennessee on March 2nd, 2024. He was 77 years old. In January 2025, after 45 years, the sheriff's office says the long unsolved case is closed. It took 16 years for Chicago police to arrest their suspect in a 1999 slaying, and another decade for him to be sentenced. On May 21st, 1999, 65-year-old Marjorie Collette were found deceased in her bed by her niece in the Edison Park neighborhood in Chicago, Illinois. Jerome Lawrence and another man had been doing remodeling work on Marjorie's house in the days before she was found, so they became suspects. After Lawrence stole his wife's car and called her from Arkansas and Georgia for help, she reported him to the Chicago police. 4 days after the crime took place, a detective and assistant state's attorney went to the Marion jail in Arkansas, where Lawrence had been picked up on a charge of theft by receiving and an Illinois charge of parole violation. The authorities locked Lawrence, whom they found in possession of Marjorie's belongings, in an interview room after questioning him. They returned that evening to an empty room. Lawrence had crawled through the ceiling and walked out of the jail, becoming the 5th person to escape from the then new facility. The last time Willie Britton saw his stepfather was earlier the year when Lawrence was being arrested on a domestic battery charge for beating Willie's mother. Within a month of that arrest, the police were interviewing Willie and his mother about Lawrence in connection with a far more gruesome crime, the slaying and home invasion of far northwest side resident Marjorie Collette. Willie said that Lawrence came up with the plan for the home invasion, which he discussed with his relatives. Willie said he saw this as a way to support us, a second chance. He figured he had this lady and she would be his easy come-up. Lawrence believed that Marjorie, who had worked at Walgreens for 35 years and had retired months earlier, was rich. He smothered Marjorie with her pillow, slit her dog's throat for barking, and went off with a bag full of her electronics and a safe. Lawrence, who was arrested multiple times in Florida and used an alias there, was never connected by Florida authorities to the Chicago case. On February 11th, 2015, 16 years later, 32-year-old Willie, who has had nightmares about seeing his stepfather again, relived one of his worst fears as he walked past Lawrence. They were in the 5,300 block of North Lincoln Avenue in the city's Budlong Woods neighborhood. Willie said, "I could not believe it. My jaw almost dropped. I pulled out my phone and called the police. I told them his name and that he is wanted for first-degree slaying, and he has been wanted for 16 years. Willie went into a nearby Chase Bank as he awaited the arrival of the officers. When the police responded minutes later, he ran outside screaming to point out Lawrence. But the police, Willie said, were reluctant to arrest Lawrence, who presented them with a Florida Department of Corrections ID with a different name. Joseph Mahar. Willie said, "They almost let this man get away again. He presented the bogus ID. I am like, look, I know 100% fact this man is my stepfather." The police then arrested Lawrence after checking his Illinois Department of Corrections photo and eventually confirmed his identity with fingerprints. He was then charged with first-degree slaying. On September 14th, Lawrence had swapped the jeans and gray hoodie in which he was arrested for a brown Department of Corrections jumpsuit. When Lawrence walked into the Cook County Circuit Court courtroom, he stared into the sparsely occupied gallery where Marjorie's niece, Judy Beavis, was seated. Judy, who anxiously leaned over the courtroom benches with her hands clasped during the hearing, said, "I am just glad they got him because he threatened our family. When he escaped, the police were watching the house. Through the investigators," he said. "Once he got out, he would get us. It is kind of scary seeing him back in Illinois." Florida Department of Corrections officials said that once an inmate is in custody, his identifying information, including name and fingerprints, is sent to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, which in turn relays it to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The FBI then assigns the inmate a number. In Lawrence's case, the FBI officials assigned him a second number before they made a connection between his warrants in Illinois and the new arrests in Florida. Prosecutors portrayed Lawrence as a career criminal, pointing to 6 felony charges, including burglary and robbery in Cook County, and 4 other felony charges in Florida, including fleeing and eluding in 1999, robbery in 2000, and arson in 2005. Nearly a decade after he was arrested, on February 4th, 2025, 55-year-old Jerome Lawrence was sentenced to 17 years and must serve 85%. He will be given credit for the 3,434 days already served. Una Crown was an 86-year-old woman who was slain in her home in England in 2013. A few bloodied nail clippings helped to convict her perpetrator 12 years later. On January 13th, 2013, Una Crown's niece, Judy Payne's husband John, went to pick up Una from her home in the Cambridgeshire town of Wisbech, England, for Sunday lunch. The curtains were drawn, so he went to a neighbor to collect a spare key. He discovered 86-year-old Una inside lying face down in a pool of blood in the hallway, and a strong burning smell hung in the air. He called 999 and said that something weird had happened. The police were sent to the scene and decided Una had accidentally set herself on fire, and that injuries to her neck had been caused by her tight scarf when she fell. This meant that her home was not treated as a crime scene. A terrible mistake her family feared might cost them justice on Una's behalf. Former postmistress Una lived alone in the bungalow she once shared with her late husband Ron. Judy, Una's niece, said, "She was just a sweet little lady, would not hurt anybody." She fondly remembers a forthright aunt who spoke her mind in more ways than one. At the time, Simon Gledhill was an acting sergeant at Cambridgeshire Police. He has since admitted that they made a terrible mistake The mistake being that Yuna's home was not treated like a crime scene. The police, firefighters, paramedics, and undertakers all walked around the house, and some even touched Yuna's body to move things around. The paramedics rummaged through drawers, and blood was transferred to a light switch. The first person to raise suspicions about Yuna's demise was not a police officer, but a firefighter who urged them to secure the scene. It was not until 2 days later, after a post-mortem examination, that Yuna's demise was finally deemed suspicious. John Bolton, who bought the bungalow after Yuna's passing, said, "There is no way anybody could fall over like that and splatter blood and finger marks on the wall." He said that there was blood on the carpet and handprints on the wall when he first viewed the property. Mr. Bolton could not believe that the police thought her passing was accidental. A professional standards review found that the first police officers at Yuna's home breached the standards of professional behavior. Their actions were not, however, considered deliberately neglectful. A number of people were arrested in the case, but nobody was charged, and the case lingered for years as unsolved. Yuna's family feared her perpetrator might never be caught. 10 years later, in 2023, Judy said that she believed the case would have been solved if it was not for the big mistakes in the police investigation. The case was then taken over by Detective Superintendent Ian Moore, who acknowledged the previous errors and reiterated the force's apology to Yuna's family. Then, finally, there was a breakthrough in the case. After Yuna's demise, bloodied fingernail clippings were taken from her body and was stored. New techniques meant the police could take a fresh look at those clippings and see what new clues they might hold. DNA that was found beneath her nails matched to former kitchen installer David Newton from magazine Close in Wisbech, who had done odd jobs for Yuna. The DNA found under Yuna's nails allowed the police to cast doubt on Newton's claims that he had not seen Yuna on the day or days before her demise, and it places him at the scene of the crime. Newton had a history of unnerving behavior. In 2000, he sold a raffle ticket to one of Yuna's relatives. Afterwards, when she thought he had left, she went to get changed in her bedroom, but while in her underwear, she realized he was still there. She told the police that Newton said he loved her, adding she was really frightened. She said, "He was probably drunk. He normally is." Yuna's neighbor, Paula Birch, for whom Newton also did odd jobs, told how Newton would sometimes go to her window while she was in bed and, despite her asking him to leave, would sometimes ignore this and hover outside with a cigarette. In April, Newton was arrested and charged. His trial started in January 2025, 12 years after the crime took place, and his defense team told the court, in the absence of the jury, the issue of other possible suspects was a live issue. The prosecution said that there was no evidence she passed away during a robbery, instead claiming that cash was taken from her purse as an afterthought. The trial heard 70-year-old Newton took money from her handbag and spent it at an ex-serviceman's club the day after her demise. Jurors spent about 29 hours in deliberation, longer than they heard evidence in the trial for, before finding Newton guilty of ending Yuna's life. Detective Superintendent Moore said, "In 2013, an 86-year-old widow was robbed of her life. Nothing can take the pain of this heartbreaking case away, but I hope today's verdict gives Yuna's family the closure they deserve and the answers they have longed for. My thoughts are very much with them at this time." Sentencing Judge Mr. Justice Neil Garnham told Newton, "This was a ferocious and sustained knife attack on a defenseless old lady in her own home." There was an intake of breath and whispers of yes from the public gallery as the sentence was passed on February 14, 2025. He was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 21 years. The defendant appeared to raise an eyebrow before swiftly being led to the cells. Detective Sergeant Dan Harper read a statement outside the court afterwards on behalf of Yuna's family. "In 2013, we heard how our auntie Yuna had passed away. 2 days later, we heard it was deliberate, and our world stopped. An elderly widow watching her favorite TV program, feeling warm and safe in her own home. The attack was brutal, horrific, and an assault on a defenseless, frail, elderly widow. The verdict in this case has prevented him from causing further distress and misery to others. Since her untimely and savage passing, 3 close family relatives, including her brother, have sadly passed away, not knowing her perpetrator has been brought to justice. The family thanked all who have helped to get to this point and said that they could carry on with their lives, knowing justice has been done. A mother has been keeping a dark secret for over 2 decades. In March 1998, a man walking his dog in the Callans area of Warrington, England, spotted something wrapped in 2 knotted bin bags. Inside, he discovered the body of a newborn baby boy. With no immediate clue where the baby had come from, local people gave him the name Callum, after the Callans area where he was found. In the days after baby Callum's discovery, tests found that wads of tissue paper had been inserted into his mouth and throat, confirming his end was not likely to have been an accident. Forensic investigators found blood from the baby's mother on the bin bags and were able to extract a full DNA profile. A list was drawn up of teenage girls who had been absent from 3 local schools around the time of baby Callum's demise, so that their DNA could be tested. A number of young women were even arrested after their families suggested to the detectives that they might be involved, but the original investigation stalled and the case went cold for years. Around 20 miles away from where baby Callum was found, in Croxteth, Liverpool, his mother had not told a soul, not even her husband. Not only had she hidden the birth and passing of baby Callum, but no one had ever known that she had been pregnant. The baby's father would spend the next 25 years oblivious to the fact he had fathered a second child. Years later, it was their older son, born in 1996, who inadvertently unlocked the mystery of Callum's identity. In 2016, the first review of the National DNA Database was ordered, resulting in a list of hundreds of names of potentially linked people to the case. Some attempts had been made to narrow it down by the time Detective Inspector Hannah Friend took on the case in 2021. Early in the case, the detectives were thrilled when a name caught their attention. It was someone who lived near where Callum was found and had been spoken to by the original investigation team, but they had not given a statement or had their details recorded properly. Detective Hannah said, "We thought maybe this is somebody who slipped through the net, and as it turned out, it was not at all. We were all so disappointed because we thought we had solved it." After 2 years of ruling out potential suspects from the original list, Detective Hannah made the decision in 2023 to run a new trawl of the National DNA Database. She was confronted with a fresh list of roughly 500 names and, in her words, a new search for a needle in a haystack. But this time was different. Amongst the names was Matthew Sharkey. Initially, his name was one among several interesting DNA profiles, which were sent to a forensic scientist for a more detailed comparison with baby Callum. A few months before baby Callum's mother was arrested, Detective Hannah got an email from a scientist with the subject heading, "Are you sitting down?" The email confirmed that Matthew was a direct relative of baby Callum, with a 1 in 36 billion likelihood of him not being related. Detective Hannah Friend said, "We were able to identify a woman who we thought was the mother of Callum, and that was Joanne Sharkey." The investigation team were at pains to be as sure as they could be that they had the right person before moving in, as the next step was a devastating one. Detective Friend said, "I did not want to be walking through that door and destroying people's lives." Joanne was sitting on a couch in pink pajamas bearing the word "Mum" when the police went in on July 28, 2023. Body-worn camera footage showed her listening to the arresting officer, wide-eyed but quiet and compliant. Gesturing towards her stunned husband, Neil, she told the arresting officer, "He does not know anything about this." With no evidence at that stage about how Callum had passed away or who the person responsible was, both parents were arrested. A court later heard that, unbeknown to them, They were recorded as they sat in the back of a police car on the way to the custody suite. Joanne said to her husband, "I am not going to deny nothing. It is what it is, isn't it? I did it." In hours of police interviews, Joanne explained how in the summer of 1998, she had become pregnant for a second time, in the grip of severe but undiagnosed postnatal depression following the birth of their first son, Matthew. She said her reaction had been, "I cannot do this again." She told the police that she had been terrified to see news coverage about baby Callum and think that was me. She said, "It is haunting, something you think about every day. You try and push it out, but it creeps back in." Early on, she had been unsure if she was pregnant, but there were no doubts from around 5 months in. She told the police that her husband's long hours and shifts meant that they had been strangers in the night, and it had not been difficult to hide her growing bump by wearing baggy clothing. In a remarkable statement later read in court by Joanne's barrister, Neil himself described how he was not the greatest husband and father, and how he blamed himself for what had happened. Joanne told the police that her memory was scattered with blanks about Callum's birth, but she recalled how Neil and Matthew must have been out of the house. She also could not recall precisely what she did to end his life, only that she felt she just had to make him quiet. Medical evidence suggested that Callum had likely been subjected to some form of mechanical asphyxiation. Joanne described driving aimlessly until she came to the spot near Gulliver's World theme park where she dumped Callum's body. It later emerged that she was spotted on that day by a retired man out for a walk, who remembered a woman emerging from the woodland looking visibly upset. One of the residents of the cul-de-sac in Liverpool described the moment she learned her neighbor for more than 30 years had been charged with ending the life of her baby boy. She said, "When I heard about it and I saw her name, I thought, that is not that woman. That is not the same woman that we have lived by all these years." Another neighbor said that when the police first arrived at the family's immaculate semi-detached house in July 2023, she had thought one of the lodgers they sometimes hosted must have been in trouble. It simply did not make sense that someone like kind, funny, and normal council worker Joanne Sharkey could have committed a crime, but the truth was that the detectives had finally cracked a cold case that had lingered unsolved on the books of Cheshire Police for 25 years. From this point, the questions left were complex legal and medical ones to determine whether Joanne was capable of forming a rational judgment when she ended Callum's life, and was she guilty of slaying or manslaughter. The evidence from psychiatrists commissioned by both the defense and the prosecution all pointed the same way. Joanne's mental illness meant she had a partial defense. Detective Friend said, "My responsibility as an investigator is to follow the evidence and to develop that evidence so we can seek the truth. My personal feelings about Joanne? You wonder on one hand how anybody could do this to a beautiful child, a precious child who deserved to live. On the other hand, I think how awful to be in this situation where you think that is the best and only option that you have." Joanne's fate was decided at Liverpool Crown Court on April 4th, 2025, by Judge Mrs. Justice Eadie, who concluded that her postnatal depression had impaired her judgment so severely the case called for compassion rather than punishment. She was given a 2-year prison sentence suspended for 2 years, with a requirement for mental health treatment. For Detective Inspector Friend and her team, that promise made by Callum's graveside in 2021 had been fulfilled. She added, "We will, once sentencing has concluded, go back to his grave to lay some flowers and just pay him our respects, and I hope that he can rest in peace." For Joanne, the past quarter of a century of her life had, in her own words, been spent waiting for that knock on the door. A woman's remains have been identified 17 years after her legs were found in a San Diego dumpster and the perpetrator was discovered close to home. On October 5th, 2003, legs were found in a dumpster at an apartment complex in the 1600 block of Hilton Head Court in Rancho San Diego, California. When the legs were discovered after a 911 call from a worker in the complex, there was little evidence to go on. The complex was searched for other body parts, but none were found. Though investigators at the time were able to determine the remains belonged to an adult female victim, the victim's identity and circumstances of her demise remained a mystery for nearly 2 decades. In June 2020, cold case investigators began using investigative genetic genealogical techniques to solve the case. The San Diego County Sheriff's Department said in a news release, "In this case, the goal was to find relatives whose own DNA profile matched those of an unidentified victim. Once the victim's profile was developed, it was uploaded into commercial genealogy sites that allow law enforcement agencies to participate." In late 2020, the authorities identified the remains as Laurie Potter's. Shortly after, the detectives began an intense investigation into Laurie's life at the time of her demise. Sheriff Lieutenant Thomas Seaver said, "Once we identified Laurie Potter, we went back through her life and tried to identify who she was, where she was living, who were her friends or family during that time frame." The investigators then said that there was substantial and conclusive evidence that Laurie's husband, Jack Potter, was responsible for her demise, but declined to go into specifics. In 2003, the married couple was living in Temecula, California. Laurie was 54 at the time. She was never reported missing. That is because, according to the investigators, only one person knew about her disappearance, her then husband. Her friends and family had not heard from her in years, but were alarmed to learn that her life was taken. Jack was arrested on May 12, 2021 at his Rancho Cucamonga apartment and was being held without bail at the San Diego Central Jail. According to Troy Dugal, one of the lead investigators in Laurie's case, her family were very happy that she has been identified. They were under the impression that she was just living somewhere else. He said, "Nobody knew, and they are extremely happy, once they get over the grief of Laurie being deceased, that we identified and arrested the suspect. So it is bittersweet." The authorities believe that Laurie's life was ended shortly before she was found, either the day before or the day of, but did not specify how she lost her life. In February 2025, 72-year-old Jack Potter pleaded guilty to second-degree slaying. On May 2, 2025, he was sentenced to 15 years to life in state prison. An Albuquerque man was found guilty of all charges in connection to an assault that occurred more than 30 years ago. On November 26, 1994, a 43-year-old woman named Susan was running near the Rio Grande Nature Center State Park in New Mexico when she was attacked and brutally assaulted. Despite the best efforts of the detectives, the perpetrator could not be found and the case went cold. Susan passed away 19 years later in 2013, and her assault kit remained untested until 2020. Then, 2 years later, in 2022, there was a DNA match to an Albuquerque man, Gilbert Contreras, and he was taken into custody. On November 25, 2024, a jury found him guilty of 2 counts of criminal penetration and kidnapping. Before the jury issued their verdict, they heard from both the prosecution and the defense in the case. Prosecutor Jack Bennett Jacks said the following during the sentencing hearing. "He beat her, kicked her, forced her to a secluded area by the river in the Bosque, and brutally and violently assaulted her." He continued, "Naked, bound, and still gagged, she waited. She played lifeless. She tried to seem unconscious until she felt like she could start to work her way back toward the trail she had been running on that day. She had been beaten with a rock, tied with strips of her own clothing, and she was indecently assaulted twice." The state read a statement from the woman who came across Susan that day back in 1994. It read, "Her face was twice the swelling of the normal face. Her eyes were like little slits. She had big bruises and blood coming down her mouth." The judge also heard from her daughter, who said that her mother passed away before ever seeing justice. In closing arguments, the defense and prosecution focused on the credibility of the DNA evidence. Defense attorney Adam D. Oakey said, There was no due diligence in this investigation, not in 1994, and not today. There were issues with the lab, all the way through which was glossed over. The prosecution dismissed that claim, saying that there were no issues with the evidence or the lab it was processed in. The defense also claimed that at one point, there could have been a consensual relationship between the victim and Contreras, to which the prosecution responded, "It was not mentioned in opening, and there is no evidence of it." The state argued for the max sentencing of 72 years because of how violent the crime was and Contreras' previous criminal record, while the defense wanted 15 to 20 years because he was already almost 60 years old. Ultimately, Judge Courtney Weeks sentenced Gilbert Contreras on March 6, 2025 to 54 years behind bars and said Contreras will most likely spend the rest of his life in prison. Judge Courtney Weeks said, "There is a long felony history. There is a history of violent crime with Mr. Contreras. I do not think the court has to reiterate that this is an extremely violent and an extremely heinous case." The man responsible for the brutal slaying of a Minnesota woman in 1986 has been convicted and sentenced, but a judge reversed his conviction and he needed to be proven guilty once again. On July 16, 1986, 38-year-old Nancy Daugherty was found deceased in her Chisholm, Minnesota home by police conducting a welfare check. The officials said that she had been beaten, indecently assaulted, and strangled. During the investigation, witnesses reported hearing a woman screaming in the early morning hours. BCA scientists obtained a full DNA suspect profile from the male DNA that was found on the victim and at the scene. At that time, the DNA did not match any known persons in the criminal DNA database, and the case went cold. Over the years, the investigators interviewed and collected DNA from more than 100 people. In 2020, 34 years after the crime, the authorities obtained a DNA sample from Michael Allen Carbo Jr. of Chisholm with his consent. The Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension confirmed that the DNA sample taken from Carbo was a match to the male DNA found on the victim and at the 1986 crime scene. Carbo was arrested in July of that year, and in 2022, he was found guilty in the first degree while committing criminal conduct for ending the life of Nancy. He was sentenced to life in prison at the time. In May 2024, the Minnesota Supreme Court reversed Carbo's conviction, saying the judge in the 2022 trial unjustly denied his defense's attempt to submit evidence of a possible alternative suspect. Carbo's second trial started on January 13, 2025. County Attorney Kim Mackey said, "Our thoughts go out to the family of Nancy Daugherty. This has been a long road to justice. The family of Miss Nancy has shown the utmost strength, and we thank them for their support from the beginning to the end." In January 2025, a jury found the 56-year-old guilty for the second time. Carbo's original sentencing was set for March 4th, but shortly before his defense team requested an acquittal. Carbo's defense submitted that request to Judge Robert Friday on February 14th. They are hoping for a third trial. They maintain that Carbo is innocent and another person is responsible for taking Nancy's life. The prosecutors have argued that DNA connects Carbo to the crime. Carbo's case will now revert to district court. The St. Louis County Attorney's Office, which originally charged him, said it was disappointed in the decision and remains committed to prosecuting Mr. Carbo. A case of a woman who had been missing for 52 years in what became one of the United Kingdom's longest cold case mysteries was finally solved. In March 1972, Sheila Fox vanished from her home in Coventry, England, just days after her 16th birthday. It was rumored that she had run off with an older man, the identity of whom was a mystery. All the police had to go on was a grainy black and white photo of her. The story of Sheila begins at a modest terraced house on Gulson Road, less than a mile from Coventry's iconic modernist cathedral. Sheila was born on February 26, 1956. Only then she was christened Sheila in honor of her parents' joint Irish heritage. She later changed the spelling of her name to Sheila in a bid to blend in with her English classmates. Both her mother, Anne, and father, Chris, a bricklayer, hailed from County Wexford in Ireland and had moved to the Midlands at the end of World War II when Chris found work there, rebuilding the city, which had been heavily bombed by the Luftwaffe. Sheila was the firstborn child of the couple that was born in England. Her elder brothers, John and Chris Jr., and sister Bridget, were all born in Ireland and moved to Coventry as young children. Sheila appears to have had a conventional childhood in the city. She was apparently intending to leave school at 16, something that was normal in the 1970s. This would have happened in July 1972, but instead, she would leave Coventry and her family abruptly that March. It was at this point that the story of Sheila's life as a missing person began. The precise circumstances of what prompted her to run away from home remain unclear. The accepted version of events among members of her wider family is that she had embarked upon a relationship with an older man, and her parents disapproved, or she feared that they would if they found out. According to her cousin Kevin Fox, the family story was that she had run off with the insurance man, the man from the Prue. The man from the Prue, short for Prudential, was a popular insurance advertising slogan at the time Sheila vanished. Sheila's frantic parents quickly reported her disappearance to the police. They provided the police with a solitary, grainy black and white photograph of her gazing wistfully into the distance on a recent seaside family holiday to help identify her. At the time, the West Midlands police were hopeful she had just moved regions, but after failing to find her, they launched numerous appeals, releasing the blurry black and white image of her and asking Brits to keep an eye out for the teen. Over the next 6 decades, the detectives had no idea what happened to her until they put out a fresh appeal with the same grainy photo in 2024. Within hours of the new appeal, members of the public got in touch and helped the police to track the missing woman down. Detective Sergeant Jenna Shaw said, "Every missing person has a story, and their families and friends deserve to know what happened to them and, hopefully, be reunited with them." Just 16 months after disappearing, Sheila gave birth to a son, Robert, in July 1973, who turned out to be her only son. Rob's birth certificate shows he was fathered by a man called John Foster, who is described as a barman from Enfield, North London. By that time, Sheila had changed her surname to Foster, suggesting that Sheila and John had gotten married. Teenage mum, Sheila, remained estranged from her parents and siblings at this point. She got back in touch with her family in the 1980s, but by then, the whole family had moved to Canada. While Sheila was out of contact, Chris and Anne Fox and Sheila's 3 older siblings had indeed emigrated. They left Coventry for Delta, British Columbia in 1976 to start a new life, perhaps partly to put the trauma of Sheila's disappearance behind them. The precise details of what happened when she tried to get back in touch are unclear, but it is believed that word reached the Fox family in Canada, and the whole notion that Sheila was missing was laid to rest at this point. But apparently, no one got around to informing West Midlands police that they were back in contact. Cousin Kevin recalls, "We all thought at the time that her parents would have informed the police that she had been found, but who knows? Maybe they did, and the message got lost in the records." It is also unclear what happened to her relationship with John Foster, but by 1983, Sheila had married divorced father of 2, Jack Thorpe, who is 7 years her senior. Sheila and Rob took his surname. Jack was a chauffeur that had grown up in northwest London, and it is thought that the couple were living in the area at this time, and subsequently. Certainly from 2003, they were in a flat just off London's North Circular Road in Cricklewood. Then, in 2015, Sheila and Jack Thorpe bought a flat in Watford, where they still live. 51-year-old Rob, who is also married, lives around the corner from his mother and her husband in the Hertfordshire, England commuter town. He works as a lorry driver. It was at their flat just outside Watford town centre that Sheila was tracked down in January 2025 and asked about her sudden international fame. courtesy of being found by West Midlands police. Sheila declined to comment in detail on her strange life story, saying only, "It all happened a long time ago. I have moved on. It is all in the past. It has been a misunderstanding, and I do not want to say any more." Sheila's mother Anne passed away in Delta, British Columbia in August 1996, and her father, Chris, passed away there in 2019 at the age of 98. In 2018, when her brother Christopher passed away at age 71, Sheila demonstrated that any suggestion that she was estranged was no longer the case. She posted a loving tribute, writing on Facebook, "Remembered with love, sleep well." A month later, on his birthday, she posted on legacy.com, "No card today, no cake. Heavy hearts and tears. Blessed to have had you as my brother, Sheila X." Her surviving siblings still live in British Columbia, Canada. Finding Sheila brought an end to a 52-year mystery and the oldest missing person cold case in the area. A perpetrator has been caught more than 30 years after he committed 2 violent crimes. One of his victims survived the attack, while the other one's life was brutally taken. On October 16, 1989, the Mesa Police Department of Arizona conducted a welfare check on 22-year-old Susan Amy Morse after she did not show up for work. The officers found her in her apartment, unresponsive on the bed, beaten and strangled with an electrical cord. She had been indecently assaulted. An autopsy revealed that her cause of demise was from asphyxiation. The police said that there were no signs of forced entry at the scene of the crime. Mesa Police Department Detective Teresa Van Galder said, "Susan was last seen by neighbors late the night before, so we do not know if someone came and knocked on her door and she opened it, or whether the person was known to her." Just over a year later, on November 23, 1990, another woman, this time a 23-year-old single mother, was also indecently assaulted in the same apartment complex. The 23-year-old woman in that case, however, survived after being assaulted. Her assailant also stole cash and a VCR before fleeing. In both cases, the police took DNA swabs and created a profile for the unknown male assailant. On November 2, 2002, the Mesa Police Department Crime Lab found that the DNA in both cases matched, linking the crime scenes. The DNA was then compared to profiles of convicted offenders using the FBI's National Database of Convicted Offenders, but yielded no results. And the trails in both cases went cold for years. In 2024, more than 2 decades later, the defendant himself have provided the break in the case after being arrested for a misdemeanor offense in Colorado Springs. That arrest was fortuitously timed with the opened investigation into the apartment complex attacks. Using advanced DNA testing funded by the Sharkey Project, Thomas David Cox was identified as a suspect. His DNA matched samples collected from both crime scenes, and his palm matched a print taken from the second victim's apartment. Sergeant Chuck Trapani said, "When there is new technology or new techniques on how to identify a suspect or examine evidence, we buy into that, and we re-examine the evidence as the years go on. And in this particular case, it worked out dramatically. Miss Morse, she does not have any family that we know of. Her parents have passed away, but we do have the second victim, which is the victim of an indecent assault. She is still alive, and from what the detective told me, she is so happy that we possibly caught the suspect." Cox was then extradited from Colorado to Arizona. He pleaded guilty on February 2, 2024, to 1 count of first-degree premeditated slaying and 1 count of aggravated assault. A judge sentenced Cox to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. County Attorney Rachel Mitchell said, "One of the most agonizing aspects of cold cases is the long uncertainty endured by victims and their families. This defendant committed these offenses in such a cruel manner and then went on to have a full life while the victim's young life was halted. It is only appropriate that this defendant spend the rest of his life in prison." Advancements in technology helped investigators solve a nearly 33-year-old cold case regarding 2 women hiking in the Henning State Conservation Area in Taney County, Missouri. On August 15, 1992, 2 young Texas women were on vacation in Branson when they went for a hike at Henning State Park Conservation Area in Taney County, Missouri. The 2 women, who remain unnamed, were approached by a man at the start of their hike. The man was looking for a lost wallet or something and was asking the woman if they had seen it. After this encounter, the women continued their walk and passed the man again. At that second interaction, the man started attacking them. He had a rock in his hand and he began to assault both with the rock. One victim was rendered incapacitated while the other woman pretended to be deceased. The man then took the unconscious woman to another location where he forcibly, indecently assaulted her. That was when the other woman took the chance to escape and get help. She ran to the parking lot and flagged down a passing motorist. The authorities were contacted and the search was on. A helicopter spotted the first victim, but the man was nowhere to be found. Both victims were taken to a Springfield hospital. One had sustained such severe injuries that she was in a coma for several months. The Missouri State Highway Patrol and Taney County Sheriff's Department launched a joint investigation. The victims even appeared on America's Most Wanted in hopes of identifying the assailant. However, no suspects were identified during the initial investigation, and the case went cold. It was not until 2008, 16 years after the incident occurred, that the one victim's assault kit was tested. Missouri State Highway Patrol Sergeant Mike McClure said, "It was not until 2008 that the original evidence taken from her room at the hospital was examined at the Missouri State Highway Patrol Crime Lab, where particulate evidence from him, DNA, created a suspect profile, but we did not have a match for it because the case was cold." The crime had gone unsolved for another 14 years, until 2022, when the Missouri State Highway Patrol continued their investigation with the Taney County Sheriff's Office. Along with advancing forensic technology, it led to the identification of Tony Lee Wagner as a suspect, at which time he was arrested by Fort Scott police. Sergeant McClure said, "It was a difficult thing to determine based on only the descriptive evidence that we had from years and years ago. The Fort Scott Police Department gathered DNA evidence from Wagner, and it was tested by Parabon Nanolabs. After a positive match, the Taney County Prosecuting Attorney's Office charged Wagner with 2 counts of first-degree assault, kidnapping, and forcible assault." Court documents indicated that the trial was moved on a change of venue from Taney to Ozark County, and after several delays, the trial began on March 24, 2025, in Ozark County Circuit Court. The trial lasted 4 days, resulting in a guilty verdict from the jury and a recommendation of a sentence of life without parole. A jury found 63-year-old Wagner guilty on 2 counts of first-degree assault, causing serious physical injury or special victim, and 1 count of forcible assault or attempted forcible assault with a weapon or physical injury. Formal sentencing is set for July 11, 2025. The investigators in Florida have used DNA evidence to link a man living in Orlando to at least 2 assault cold cases from more than 2 decades ago. In the early hours of the morning of February 1st, 2002, an Orange County woman was attacked as she was walking to a friend's nearby apartment. An unknown suspect approached her from the side of the building, tackled her to the ground, and told her to shut up or he would stab her if she started to scream. The suspect, who had been holding a knife, then forced the victim behind a garbage dumpster where he indecently assaulted her. He then forced her further into a wooded area and assaulted her again. After the victim began to cry, the investigators said that the suspect instructed her to put her pants over her head and wait for several minutes until he had left the area, or he would return and hurt her. After he fled, the woman returned to her apartment and called 911. She said she had not been able to see the suspect's face and likely would not be able to identify him. months later, on July 10th, another woman reported being attacked in Orlando as she was returning home from a night out with friends around 3:30 a.m. The woman was approaching her front door when she noticed a man peeping around the corner at her. He then ran up to her, covered her face with a blue towel, and dragged her into some bushes near her apartment complex. He indecently assaulted her as he asked her personal questions about herself, including her name, whether she had children, and what she had been doing that night before coming home. The suspect forced her to keep the towel over her face throughout the attack, then asked her to lay face down and wait as he ran away. As soon as he had fled, the woman gathered up her clothes and ran for her nearby apartment. The detectives gave the offender the name of the Woodline Predator because of his habit of dragging his victims into nearby wooded areas just past the tree lines. Both cases remained unsolved for nearly 2 decades, until the investigators were able to use DNA taken from the crime scenes to develop a genetic profile that helped them identify a suspect in the case through the use of genetic genealogy. In 2020, the 2 cases resurfaced when investigative reporter Greg Fox started probing to learn more about any remaining evidence in the cases. Taking another look, the Orlando Police Department submitted the unknown DNA from the assault kits to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement Genetic Genealogy Investigations Program. Together with Parabon Nanolabs, the team was able to identify 4 persons of interest from the DNA and genetic genealogy research. Further investigation by the Orlando Police Department's SVU detective, Graham Cage, narrowed the suspect down to 2, and then finally 1, Dwight Arthur Harris. The investigators believe that Harris may also be tied to other cases in the area and are already testing DNA in a second Orlando Police Department case that could be connected. The Orange County Sheriff's Office has said that they also have reason to believe he could be linked to another 2011 case, where Harris had been identified as a suspect, but the victim had later declined to pursue charges and declined an assault kit. The victim in that case, who had been a known lady of the night, told the police that a man produced a box cutter and assaulted her. She was able to provide the authorities with the tag number on his vehicle and a description of the vehicle that helped them identify Harris as a possible suspect in the case before she stopped cooperating. On July 2nd, 2021, 50-year-old Harris was arrested at his home in Orlando. He was not known to law enforcement, and at the time of his arrest, the investigators said that he was living a normal life. He had a family, and he had a regular job as a night delivery driver. Harris has reportedly been living in the Orlando area since the alleged crimes occurred in 2002. He was charged with 2 counts of battery with a fatal weapon or physical force. Detective Graham Cage said, "They thought this day would never come. They thought these were cold cases forever and that they would never be solved." Before Harris received his sentence, one of the victims testified over video about the suffering she has endured over the past 20 years. The victim said, "For 2 decades, I have been the one serving a sentence, not in a prison of bars, but a prison of memory, of shame, of nightmares, of endless echoes of your cruelty. You are a coward, not just because you hurt me, but because you have never had the strength to admit what you have done." Harris originally pleaded not guilty, but agreed to plead no contest to 1 charge in exchange for one of the cases and all the other charges being dropped by prosecutors. Harris, once facing a life sentence, pleaded no contest in Orange County Court on February 17, 2025, securing a 15-year prison sentence with credit for 3 years already served. Upon release, he will be on 5 years of supervised probation and must register as a predator. Harris's victim addressed the court, sharing the emotional toll the attack had taken on her life. She said, 20 years of fear, anger, and grief. Now, 15 years of a prison sentence is a fraction of the time I have spent trying to live in the wreckage you left behind. Even now, I know the difference between us. I did not choose what happened to me. You did. Now a mother of 2, she said she refuses to let Harris's actions define her. Judge Diego M. Madrigal III acknowledged her bravery in speaking out. He said, I just want to tell you how lucky your family is to have somebody like you. You are incredibly strong, incredibly brave, to come in here, even if it is by video, and share what you have been through for the last 2 decades. 54-year-old Harris will remain in prison until at least 2036. A Saxman, Alaska man, was sentenced to 25 years in prison for a crime that has haunted the Ketchikan community for decades. In January 1993, a 14-year-old girl was walking across the school baseball diamond at Dudley Field near Ketchikan High School on a rainy night. A man in green fishing-style rain gear and a black scarf with a multicolored pattern of pink or purple wrapped around his face appeared from the darkness. The man grabbed her from behind and covered her mouth. He told the girl that he had a knife and would use it on her if she screamed or told anyone what happened. He indecently assaulted the girl behind the baseball dugout and then fled into the dark. The girl ran to a nearby house and reported the assault. She did not see the attacker's face because of the scarf that was masking it, but swabs were taken and an assault kit was sent to be tested. Despite the police's extensive investigation, the case went cold. Then, more than 10 years later, in 2004, the Alaska State Crime Laboratory developed a DNA profile from the male DNA collected during the victim's assault examination. It was then uploaded into a national database. No match was found, at least not immediately. But that changed in 2021, when testing of an unrelated assault kit led to a potential match, Michael Williams, in the national database. That kit was tested as part of a project to work through previously unsubmitted and untested assault kits in the state. The state lab confirmed the match to Williams by comparing the DNA sample from the victim's assault kit to a known sample taken from him. The 54-year-old Saxman resident was accused of 2 felony counts of indecent assault and indecent abuse of a minor. Trial proceedings for the 30-year-old case began on January 9, 2024, in Ketchikan. The prosecutor told the jury the rareness of the profile in this case was rarer than 1 in 330 billion. Cheryl Duda, a forensic DNA analyst, will testify that you can search the earth multiple times and not find a profile like it. The male DNA collected from the assault kit in this case belonged to Michael Williams. It is proven by science. He is not in the dark anymore. Defense attorney Leif Thompson cast doubt on the DNA evidence in his opening statements. He said, "You are going to hear evidence that there is no smoking gun in this case. There is no scarf with black and pink on it. I mean, there is no diary saying, 'I did it.' There is no other evidence to consider. It is a case entirely based on the science. And nobody believes in anything other than a DNA report. If anybody thinks Mr. Williams did it, it is for no other reason." He raised questions about degradation and how many hands handled the DNA over 30 years. Thompson claimed that the number that McCarthy quoted, 1 in 330 billion, is misleading because it does not account for subsets of the population that he said may be more likely matches. Additionally, Thompson leaned on the fact that there were very few descriptive details of the assailant at the time of the crime. Williams sat at the defense table, expressionless, during the opening statements and testimony. He was facing as many as 30 years in prison if convicted of first-degree indecent assault. The second charge carries a maximum penalty of 10 years in prison. Following a week-long trial, a Ketchikan jury found 54-year-old Williams guilty on January 16, 2024. Judge Daniel Doty handed down Williams' sentence on February 24, 2025. 55-year-old Michael Williams was ordered to serve 25 years behind bars. His attorney, Philip Paul Weidner, said that there will definitely be both a merit appeal and a sentence appeal, and we are confident we will prevail on both with reversals and remand. A 37-year-old cold case of a woman that was found in the trunk of her own car has finally been solved thanks to DNA testing and the hard work of detectives. On December 1, 1988, the police responded to a remote construction site in Beaverton, Oregon after multiple reports of a suspicious vehicle. The Beaverton police found the abandoned car parked at the wood's edge. The vehicle had no plates, the windows were frosted, and the driver's side window was open with the keys inside. Inside the trunk, they found the body of a woman named Deborah Atrops. Her blue coat and black heels were covered in mud, and the car had noticeable amounts of mud smeared on the hood, steering wheel, gear shift, and front right tire. From early on, the detectives honed in on her husband, Robert Elmer Atrops, as the primary suspect. The two had married the year before, but had been estranged for months before Deborah's disappearance. Some people close to her worried for her safety. Mud samples were collected from the car, the body recovery location, and the suspect's home. The Oregon State Medical Examiner determined that her life was ended by manual strangulation. 30-year-old Deborah was making plans to divorce Robert. She worked as a secretary and bookkeeper. The couple shared an infant daughter they had recently adopted. Their separation was caused by marital problems, including physical abuse. Friends and co-workers witnessed concerning domestic violence behavior. Deborah had also started a new relationship with a co-worker and told friends that Robert had confronted her about the relationship and that she was worried he would end her life. On November 29, 1988, Deborah left her job in Sherwood for a 5:15 p.m. hair appointment in Tigard. She left the salon around 7 p.m. with plans to go to Robert's house in Sherwood to pick up their daughter. Around 9:30 p.m., Robert started calling friends, family, and 911 to report Deborah missing. He claimed he made these calls from his home phone, but there was no record of the calls. The investigators believe he was not at home when he made these calls. He claimed that he never saw Deborah that night, but his alibi was not fully confirmed. The case eventually went cold as the investigators cleared people close to Deborah of being potential suspects, including the new person she was dating. Over time, the case was reviewed by various investigators with no new significant leads. In 2020, more than 3 decades later, the Washington County Sheriff's Office took a new look at the case with help from cold case detective Kevin Winfield. He located additional witnesses and new information to shed light on the circumstances of the victim's end. Detective Winfield submitted additional items for forensic analysis, including the victim's clothing and soil samples collected in 1988. Ultimately, Robert's DNA was connected to the coat that Deborah was wearing when her life was taken. In addition, the FBI lab concluded that the mud collected from the victim's vehicle was indistinguishable from the mud collected at Robert's home. Detective Winfield also located information that Robert sold roofing materials at construction sites near the location where her body was found. Robert was interviewed by Detective Winfield in 2022, and there were significant discrepancies from his version of events in 1988. On March 23, 2023, Robert Atrops was indicted by a grand jury and arrested in the second degree. During his trial in April 2025, Robert's defense team argued that the Oregon lab got its DNA analysis wrong or presented misleading results due to a complex technology that relies heavily on expert interpretation far beyond an average juror's understanding. They questioned the significance of a husband's DNA potentially being on his wife's coat and say that law enforcement failed to truly consider and investigate another possible suspect. Washington County prosecutors, meanwhile, argued that the lab did nothing unusual. They have pointed to the crime lab staff's individual and collective experience conducting thousands of DNA tests each year as reasons the analysis supports their theory that Robert ended his wife's life. On April 17, 2025, after a 3-week trial, the jury needed less than a day of deliberation to find 70-year-old Robert guilty of ending his wife's life in 1988. On May 20, 2025, Judge Oscar Garcia heard arguments from both sides of when he could be eligible for parole. The court will take sentencing back up again in July. The cold case of a mystery man that was found next to the road in 2004 has finally made some progress thanks to genetic genealogy. On August 17, 2004, a man passed away at St. Joseph's Hospital in Phoenix, Arizona. While his demise was not an unusual occurrence for the hospital, the way he was found 8 days before was. Just days before, he was found lying unconscious on the sidewalk at 3rd Avenue and Madison Street. There was no identification on his person when the emergency medical services took him to the hospital. His cause of demise was determined to be heat exposure. The Phoenix Police Department worked to uncover the man's identity. The officers ran fingerprints and entered DNA samples into the combined DNA index system, but they had no luck. His case went cold, and his identity remained a mystery for more than 2 decades. Then in September 2024, the Maricopa County Office of the Medical Examiner reached out to Ramapo College's Investigative Genetic Genealogy Center in Mahwah, New Jersey for help. After taking on the case, the Genealogy Center sent a portion of a blood stain to a research organization called Genealog in Tucker, Georgia. Genealog used a process called genome sequencing to extract DNA and determine the man's genetic material. Genealog shared their files with Parabon Nanolabs to analyze the biological data, and in November, undergraduate students in a Genealogy Center workshop course got to work to identify John Doe. However, the students were unable to finish the job before the semester ended, leaving the task to the Genealogy Center staff. Only a day into the school's winter break, the team found a pair of third cousins related to the man. The team determined that John Thiellesen was the likely candidate and forwarded the info to senior medical legal investigator Kristen Eggers of the Maricopa County Office of the Medical Examiner. Working with the Arizona Attorney General's Cold Case Unit, the medical examiner positively confirmed John Doe's identity as John Thiellesen in March 2025. John was reported missing out of Toledo, Ohio, by his brother on September 1, 2004. He suffered from mental health issues and called his sister around the same time, saying he had cleansed himself and was planning to jump into an Ohio river. He was never heard from again. Eggers stated, "Ramapo College has become a beacon of hope for individuals and families across the nation. Their tireless efforts have provided answers to countless families and demonstrate an unyielding dedication to the welfare of all people, regardless of their circumstances." Arizona Attorney General Chris Mays said that she was proud of the Cold Case Unit's work to help family members of missing and slain Arizonans get closure. She stated, "With increased technology and the right kind of cooperative approach between law enforcement agencies, there is hope for the loved ones of countless victims." After more than a decade of evading justice, an Ocean County man has finally been convicted of kidnapping, assaulting, and ending the life of a 17-year-old high school student. 17-year-old Nancy Noga was a high school student at Sayreville War Memorial High School in New Jersey. She had a part-time job at a nearby rag shop in Old Bridge. On January 7, 1999, Nancy left her job for the night at approximately 6 p.m. Normally a 15-minute walk to her family's apartment, but on this night, she never came home. Nancy was reported missing to the Sayreville Police Department on that same day, following an intense search by police K-9s, helicopters, and the news media. A few days later, on January 12th, at approximately 8:57 a.m., Nancy's frozen body was found by a man walking his dog in a small wooded area behind a strip mall on Ernston Road in Sayreville, near her home. Her demise shattered the quiet suburb of Sayreville, New Jersey. Nancy was discovered fully clothed, wearing a purple Arizona jacket, jeans, and a sweater. An autopsy later determined that she lost her life due to blunt force trauma to her head. She had been struck in the head with a tree limb. It also appeared that she had been indecently assaulted. The detectives believed that Nancy, who was very cautious by nature, may have known her perpetrator. She was not the type of person who would go with someone she did not know. The police initially had a sketch of someone seen in the area at the time of the crime, but it led nowhere, and the case went cold and remained cold for more than 2 decades. In 2021, a DNA sample from Bruce A. Szymanski of Barnegat and formerly of South Amboy and Old Bridge was compared to the male DNA found on Nancy's body and underwear. The DNA was a match. In 1999, Szymanski was about 26 years old, and his wife worked at the Kmart store not far from where Nancy worked. In August 2021, Szymanski was arrested near his home in connection with the crime. He was facing charges of kidnapping, aggravated indecent assault, and taking someone's life. He has also been charged with possession of a weapon for an unlawful purpose and has pleaded not guilty to all the charges. His arrest and indictment came after an investigation in which he was identified, in part through the use of genetic genealogy, conducted by the chief genetic genealogist of Parabon Nanolabs. Szymanski was convicted in October 2024. He did not testify on his own behalf during his 3-week-long trial. His attorney, Jason Seidman, asked the jurors in his closing statement to question if they heard any evidence about an indecent assault or kidnapping. He said that while Nancy did not deserve what happened to her, there is nothing demonstrating that Szymanski is the one who committed the crimes against her. Seidman said the state's focus was on who deposited the DNA, because the state feels the only one who could have caused Nancy's demise is the one who left the DNA. He said the state believes whoever had intercourse with Nancy had to be the person who ended her life, and that is what the state has focused on since the beginning. He also said numerous people were not considered suspects because their DNA was not found on her. Seidman said, "At the end of the day, they have Bruce's DNA and nothing else. There is no evidence Bruce had anything to do with ending the life of Nancy Noga. If you have a doubt, if you are not totally convinced by their evidence, you have to find Bruce not guilty." He also said there was testimony that Nancy was likely hit from the front and left, possibly with just one strike, and that the perpetrator was likely left-handed and Szymanski is right-handed. But Middlesex County Assistant Prosecutor Katie Mae McGee, the Major Crimes Section Chief, disagreed. She said on January 7, 1999, Szymanski kidnapped, assaulted, and ended the life of Nancy, and took her bruised, bloody, and broken body and left it like a piece of trash in the woods. And she remained there until her frozen body was discovered by a man walking his dog 5 days later. McGee added that she was taken to the cold, dark wooded area, which was away from the route she would use to walk home from work. She said no one would choose to go into those woods unless they were running away from something. McGee said, "The source of the male DNA is the identity of the perpetrator. We know the DNA was still inside her when her life was ended. There is also male DNA in her underwear." She added that Nancy was found on her left side with male DNA also on the left side of her underwear. McGee said, "The defendant is the perpetrator. No one else did this. This is a case they investigated and they fought for her for 2 decades. We know Bruce had access to Nancy. Nancy had to walk home on her usual route right by the Kmart, right by where the defendant hung out, where his wife worked. She leaves work and goes right by Mr. Szymanski. It was a crime of opportunity." She said to the jurors, "The physical evidence does not lie. If you are firmly convinced the defendant is guilty of a crime charged, then you must find him guilty. If you are firmly convinced the source of the male DNA, Bruce Szymanski, is the identity of the offender, then you must find him guilty of that crime." In October 2024, Szymanski, who was charged with all first-degree crimes and third-degree possession of a weapon for an unlawful purpose, was found guilty on all charges. Seidman said that his client is disappointed with the verdict and that they disagree with the verdict. Szymanski maintains his innocence and looks forward to being sentenced so he can file an appeal shortly thereafter. During the trial, one friend recalled being in school near the end of the day when she learned Nancy's body had been found. She said it was a scary time because she and Nancy used to walk a lot to the nearby Kmart, but after Nancy's demise, she would not walk alone or walk at night. On March 17, 2025, 52-year-old Szymanski was sentenced by Superior Court Judge Joseph Payon to life in prison with a 30-year parole ineligibility period. He was also sentenced to 20 years for her kidnapping, which will be served consecutively to the previous sentence, as well as 15 years for aggravated assault and 2 consecutive sentences for first-degree felony and possession of a weapon for an unlawful purpose. Szymanski said in a 4-page letter posted on Facebook, "I did not kidnap, indecently assault, or slay Nancy Noga." The letter stated that he was offered a 10-year plea agreement that his attorney thought he could reduce to 5 years, and he would have to serve 85% before becoming eligible for parole, but he did not take the deal. When asked why, he said because he did not commit the crime. In the letter, he alleges the Department of Justice guidelines were violated in obtaining his DNA and used to obtain a warrant. The letter stated, "DNA does not make a person a perpetrator, and it also does not mean a person was kidnapped or indecently assaulted either." The letter states that his family fully supports him and suggests Nancy's family should review all the discovery. The letter said there were no signs that Nancy was kidnapped or indecently assaulted, and that day was not the first time she had not gone straight home from work. The letter states that the truth will come out, and Nancy will get the justice she deserves. Nancy definitely deserves justice, but true justice, and her family deserves closure, but it should not be at the expense of innocent people. A mother and her daughter that was traveling to Bluffton to visit family never showed up. The mother was fatally harmed and found in a ditch next to a road with her 3-year-old daughter next to her, unharmed. 50 years later, the case will finally be solved. On the evening of July 7, 1972, 26-year-old Phyllis Bailer was traveling in a borrowed car from Indianapolis to Bluffton, Indiana, with her 3-year-old daughter. They were on their way to visit Phyllis's parents, but the pair never arrived in Bluffton, and her family called the police to report her missing. Richard Bailer, Phyllis's husband at the time, said that he only got a call from her father the next morning, letting him know that Phyllis never showed. Richard began driving toward Bluffton in an effort to find his wife, whom he referred to by her middle name, Jean, and their young daughter, Jody. Richard found their car abandoned with the hood up at around 10:30 a.m. on Interstate 69 in Grant County, Indiana. About an hour later, a woman driving in nearby Allen County found Phyllis and her daughter in a ditch on the side of another road. Phyllis was deceased, and her daughter was unharmed. Both of them were taken to a local hospital where Richard was reunited with his daughter and given the unfortunate news of his wife's demise. Richard and Phyllis had been separated for about 3 months before the incident, and he quickly became a person of interest in the case. He was able to absolve himself by informing the authorities of his whereabouts at the time of the incident. An autopsy determined that Phyllis had been fatally shot and indecently assaulted. The Allen County Police and Indiana State Police investigated the case. A partial DNA profile was developed from Phyllis's clothing. The state police did not specify when the DNA profile was created. That DNA profile was used to eliminate the main suspect in the case. The police did not identify the suspect. No arrests were made at the time, and the case went unsolved for decades. As DNA testing continued to improve, the Indiana State Police's cold case team continued to work on the case. In 2024, after more than 5 decades, they developed a much stronger DNA profile, again from Phyllis's clothing. That DNA profile was taken to Identifiers International. The combined resources of the company and the cold case team were able to identify a suspect in the case in early 2025. The suspect was identified as Fred Allen Linneman, who would have been 25 years old at the time of the crime. He was a match for the DNA found on her clothes. There was no known connection between him and Phyllis. Linneman had a long criminal history, including a charge of first-degree slaying in May 1985. The investigators discovered that Linneman had been slain in Detroit in 1985. 2 men beat Linneman with a baseball bat during an argument about property. Linneman was dumped in a dumpster, which was set on fire while he was still alive. If he had been alive today, he would have been charged, and the case would have been prosecuted by the Allen County Prosecutor's Office. Indiana State Police Public Information Officer, Sergeant Wes Rolander, said on social media, "Phyllis Bailer never made it to Bluffton to visit her family. After years of questions, this family finally has answers about what happened to her." After almost 53 years, Richard says he has very mixed emotions about the police finding the person they say is responsible for Phyllis's demise. He said, "Totally relieved that it was uncovered, and that we found out who the person was, but upset that he passed away." Richard said that he wished Phyllis's parents and sister were alive to get the closure they had wanted for so many years, but that he is relieved their daughter, Jody, finally got an answer after over 5 decades. He said, "It was a blessing for our daughter to finally know." Detectives with the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department's Cold Case Unit have used advanced DNA technology to identify a suspect in a 32-year-old cold case involving burglary and indecent assault that occurred on Christmas Day in 1993. In the early morning hours of December 25, 1993, the officers responded to a report of a burglary and indecent assault in Charlotte, North Carolina. The victim was transported to a nearby hospital for treatment, and an assault kit was administered. However, with no leads at the time, the case eventually went cold. In a persistent effort to seek justice, the CMPD Cold Case Unit revisited the case almost 3 decades later, in 2022, sending evidence for analysis to Bode Technology. The breakthrough in the case came after the evidence was reanalyzed using grant funds from the Assault Kit Initiative. This led to the discovery of a partial male DNA sample, which matched Tony G. Leslie's DNA in the State Combined DNA Index System. The detectives interviewed Leslie at Scotland County Correctional Institution, where he is serving a 13-year prison sentence for several 2019 first-degree burglary convictions. Since then, he was issued 7 infractions for assault and disobeying orders. Following the interview, Leslie was indicted on charges of first-degree indecent assault and burglary. On March 17, 2025, 48-year-old Leslie pleaded guilty and received an additional 14-year prison sentence to be served consecutively after his current sentence. The victim of the indecent assault has been notified of these developments. The body of a black man found floating in water in rural San Joaquin County, California in the 1980s has been identified more than 4 decades later with the help from advancements in fingerprint technology. On the afternoon of July 13, 1981, the deputies responded to a report of a body floating in water. The body of a man was found in water near Blossom Road and Beaver Slough in the community of Thornton, located along Interstate 5, just north of Stockton. The body was badly decomposed when it was found, and he was only wearing white swim shorts with red and blue stripes. The man had suffered a gunshot wound to his right shoulder. One of the identifying characteristics was a tattoo on the left arm that said, "Black is beautiful." The case went cold, and the man remained unidentified for more than 4 decades. In 2025, advancements in fingerprint technology helped identify the deceased as Edward Donald Raymond, born February 21, 1947. He would have been 34 at the time of his demise. A few days before the body was found, a white or beige Cadillac was seen driving in the area, and the driver resembled Edward. However, neither a car nor other clothing were found at the scene. Edward Raymond also went by the alias Edward Wilson, with a different birth date of July 21, 1948. He was never reported missing. The only information they could find on him was a 1976 arrest in San Francisco when he gave an Oakland address. The case of identifying an unknown man was finally solved. Anyone with information regarding the case of what happened to Edward is asked to call the San Joaquin County Sheriff's Office at 209-46-84400. After nearly 3 decades, a 1995 Anderson County cold case have been solved. 24-year-old Richard Martin was last seen leaving Nancy's bar along Highway 81 in South Carolina on September 2, 1995. An hour and a half later, he was found 2.5 miles away, beaten and clinging to life in the middle of Welcome Road near Interstate 85. Richard was taken to the hospital, but he later succumbed to his injuries. An autopsy revealed he had been beaten by a blackjack weapon, which is a small weighted club designed to deliver a powerful blow. His demise has been under investigation since. The deputies said that night in 1995, several witnesses noticed a woman dancing with both Richard and a man named Bobby McLean, who became jealous. Tips and interviews revealed that McLean carried a similar, if not identical, weapon as to what was used to end the life of Richard. In the years after Richard's end, the sheriff's office said McLean was interviewed by detectives multiple times. They claimed McLean was the last person to see Richard alive. During an interview, the deputy said that McLean casually disclosed several details about the crime scene and Richard's whereabouts that only a person involved would have knowledge of. When McLean went through polygraph testing, the results showed that he failed. McLean passed away in 2010 due to cancer. Over the years, the detectives said they have met with the 10th Circuit Solicitor's Office regarding Richard's case, and in 2025, they agreed that probable cause showed McLean was the suspect in the case. Though he passed before facing a trial, the 10th Circuit Solicitor's Office confirmed overwhelming evidence pointed to him as Richard's perpetrator. While there is no trial and no justice, Richard's family finally knows what happened to him and why. His mother, Ada Martin, never stopped fighting for answers. She said, "I have never used the word closure, even if the people, the animals, involved in ending the life of my son had been convicted. That first month, it would never close the hole in my heart or ease the ache that never goes away. This is not closure. This is only a conclusion to this part of Richard's story."